Howdy y'all, I am Ice Gold, and as of Wednesday, I have been uploading PvP videos to this channel for a year, and it's been a very long year. There was definitely, there were definitely some times where I just enjoyed the game a lot less, and there was even a stretch of about 2 months in there where I just straight up did not play max level PvP, because it's like there were things like Beast Moon spell elements that I needed to get. There was like R2 stuff that came out. It's like Rebirth and Jades ran wild multiple times in the last year, and I kind of just wanted to explore. I'm just sort of like, has PvP gotten any better in the last year? And the short answer, in my honest opinion, is no. And as a matter of fact, it's gotten a hell of a lot worse. And I'll elaborate on that, but basically I've compiled a list of like the top 3 changes that have happened in the last year, things that are like, good for the game and the health of the game. And then I've also got the bottom 3. And seeing as this is only covering what's in the last year, I can't just say like, counter matchups, because that got added in 2021, and although that is the singular worst change to ever hit the game, it is not eligible to make this list of the things that happened in the last year. So I'll go ahead and start off with my top 3 changes, and so just to keep things positive for the start of the video. So number 3 here is limiting Regenerating Pigsy, and then later Rebirth after it came out, although that did take them another month to add that patch. But yeah, so a year ago we were in a meta that was dominated by life wizards, and you can ask anybody who does PvP, it's like any meta where life is on top is a bad meta, and nobody really wants to play when life is on top, because all it is just jading and heal spamming, and nobody really likes that. And this was sort of how this was for a while. I think this was after they took out burst healing, like a little bit after. So it's like heal overtimes were sort of the only thing left, apart from like Fairy, and Regenerate did have kind of a pretty big burst on its initial hit, with a pretty hefty heal overtime to go with it. But yeah, I mean, when these got limited, that was a really, really good thing that they did. Of course, there's still 4 copy limits of all of these, so there's still 12 giga heals that a life can use, so you can still definitely jade, but it's just not as practiced, I guess, as playing normally. So it's like life is in a decent spot now. I'd say it's middle of the pack, which is, I think, a good spot for it to be. I don't think it should be bad. I don't think it should be good. I think it should be able to compete without jading and just spamming heals incessantly, and right now I think it is in a good spot in terms of that. But I mean, there are still people occasionally who will, adapt. It's like, this is why I quit Max P for 2 months back in March. I specifically said people are just going to adapt Rebirth, Surge, Rebirth, and throw in a Gnomes here and there, just to do an insane amount of damage. And I have a video of me on my fire going against good old Esme Willow, those who know, where she gave me the Esme Willow special, and that was a very fun time. I was executing some of these insane combos, but it just wasn't meant to be that match, so that was real fun. So jading is alive and well, but it's not as practiced, and I'm happy about that. I'm happy that jading and just that general idea is not as crazy as it once was, like it was back when Regen and Pigsy were not limited. And yeah, I mean, it's the third best thing that they've done in the last year, in my honest opinion, is doing that and curbing jades in a pretty solid capacity. Second place for the top 3 changes was the Drain nerf. This happened back at the end of July, and I personally was satisfied with it. I was happy that, Drains finally got nerfed, because I have a video from around that time where I was playing on my death, and a Myth Wizard sent a Djinn at me. I think it might have had 1 buff, but it was a Jin Gambit, and I had a Ghoul, I had a Ghoul Blade, and I think a Virulence and a Bubble Up, and I sent a 6-pip Wraith, so a 1-buff Jin versus a 3-buff Wraith, and the Wraith, it got, I think, 500 less value than the single buffed Jin Gambit, which in my opinion is a little crazy, and I'm glad that's out of the game now. People can't just, spam drains, and Death is definitely not on top anymore, but it is still viable. They've got Thanos stats, so what can you do about that? But ultimately, the drain nerf, that was a big thing that needed to happen, and I'm happy that it happened. It definitely makes it into the top 3 changes from the last year with relative ease. Now, the best thing that the devs have done in the last year is not actually something that has happened yet, but it is confirmed to be happening. And really, I should have added the Hydra and Scales of Destiny nerfs onto this. Call that an honorable mention. We'll call that an honorable mention. But the bigger problem when it comes to balance is Mana Burn and Supernova. And seeing as the devs announced before October 16th that these 2 cards were getting banned in the fall update, that is grounds for making it onto this list. And I'm really happy that these are going away, because Mana Burn was just a stalling card, and it did quite a bit of damage to boot. I mean, 5 pips to do as much as that did was kind of mental, and you just weren't able to build pips against the balance and combo like you're usually able to. And just this card has sort of wreaked havoc on the arena for the last 12 years. 8 years was glory days, to be completely honest. It's like 2020 was its first nerf where it only started removing 3 pips instead of up to 6 like it used to, and then at some point in there they reduced the damage from 80 per pip burned down to 50, and right now it is still an absolutely nuts card, and I'm very glad that it's getting banned. So very, very happy about that, and it definitely gets to make this list. It is it's a good thing that's happening in the fall update, and arguably the brightest spot in the fall update, just the Mana Burn and Supernova ban. That might breathe some life back into the game, assuming all of the other changes don't suck it right back out. But we'll see how it goes. We'll see how it's looking. But that does lead me to the bottom 3 changes that have happened in the last year. And coming in at number 3, and it really was hard to limit myself to just 3, but I wanted to balance it out with the top 3. So coming in at number 3, we have adding Dark Surge. This happened with the fall update with Wallaru. And man, this... wow. Yeah, I mean, you don't have to manage your pips anymore. It's like it's like Dark Surge makes some insane stuff possible. It allows you to use high pip hits in quick succession, and with the Arc 2 spell limits being out, it's like the Berry Rain of Fire combo that I run on my fire is not beatable if you don't Triton or Pirate the Berry. It's like if you don't do that, you are eating a lot. You are eating like 7,000 damage, and I'm not even kidding. So, and that's just from the rain alone. So it's like with Surge thrown in, that allows the Fire Wizard to take an Ifrit or a Scion, and that is very broken. It's like Dark Surge is the card that ties the whole strat together. So Surge just being a thing, that's not really something that I like. It's not really something that I'm into. It's you can waste pips just willy-nilly these days, and you can just surge right back up and be fine. And I'm just not a fan of that. I think it took out a lot of skill in the game when Surge got added, and that's just how I see things. It's definitely not a great change, and I know it's like the community is a little split on this. Personally, Dark Surge has opened up so many just unfortunate things in the metas that we have seen over the last year since Wallaru came out, and that's why it gets on this list. It's just sort of made the game less fun and less interesting, and less skillful, and you don't have to manage your pips as well. So that comes to number 3. For number 2, just the general barrier to entry. On my Google Doc, I just have Arc 2 and Beast Moon spell elements, which are a big part of it. But there was also the deal with raid gear coming out, and this sort of started happening back in January when the Nightmare Dungeon initially dropped. It's like when it did, you had so because of data mine files after the Crying Sky raid. Or not when the Crying Sky raid came out, but when Wallaru came out, data mine files showed that, there were things like the Hunhao robes, the Jabalba boots, and both templates wands, depending on if your school needed P-Serve. Those were all insane. And it's like the Hunhao robe template especially sort of set things apart, because it's like I had been thinking up setups from back then that involved new raid gear because it was so good. It's like the Hunhao robes, that added a whole thing, and I had to raid for a long while. I was raiding from like around October-ish. That was when I started raiding with Dauntless Ducks, and I raided from then until about March, and that's when I sort of stopped raiding too often. And it's like for it to have taken that long, and I still don't have some of the Shabalba hats, by the way, for some of the setups. So it's like all of the raid gear, that definitely threw a wrench in things, and that's why a lot of people can't get into Peeve. And there's other things like different robes, like the Forbidden Library robe. It's just different pieces of gear is what I'm really getting at. It's like whenever something new comes out, if it's viable in PvP, you have to go grind it, or you have to open the pack. Fortunately, as of late, and this is another good thing that the devs have done lately, is that it is farmable. These pieces are. So I'm glad about that. But ultimately, it is still something new to grind for pretty often. I think the most recent thing we had to grind for was probably the Forbidden Library stuff. No, it was the gold key bosses that dropped some good gear for certain setups, and I still don't have my Takanobu Athames, so I'm gonna have to go get those. And it's just overall I do also have Arc 2 and Beast Moon spell elements in here, and the general model for these has just been horrific. I mean, Arc 2 spell elements, y'all already knew I was opposed to that whole system. It's like just the thought of having to sit there and farm Archmagus Lorcan, which had twice the health and half of the spell element yield upon the drops. It's like it was like 4 times the effort in total for grinding Arc compared to grinding Arc 1 spell elements, and that just sort of took a lot of out of it, and that was why I quit for a while. That's why I decided to go back and do some lower level PvP for about a month in there, because I stocked up on content for max level for about a month until I ran out, and then started doing just lower level for about a month as well. And it's like that just the general barrier to entry, that's gonna take in the number 2 spot here. And the number 1 spot is just really as an overall thing. There's less skill involved in the game compared to a year ago. And a year ago we had Regenerate and Pigsy, just cesspit is the best way I can really describe the meta a year ago. So for there to be less skill now than there was then, it's sort of not great. It's like there's less skill when it's all dependent on deck RNG and school diff. It's like as Legacy has begun to get phased out, we've been seeing just horrific. Basically what I'm trying to get at is your school, if your Legacy is like either nerfed or banned, like it is with Death, for example now, if your Legacy is either nerfed or banned, then your standing in the school tier list basically just resides with how good or bad the counters are to your main hang-in effect. So for a Death Wizard, that would be weaknesses. And as we know, the Myth matchup is an absolute nightmare because Death can't use weaknesses against Myth. And it's like against Ice of all schools. It's like Ice, the worst school in the game, now has a safe matchup just because like Death can't really effectively use weaknesses against Ice. So there's that. And it's like when the counters for certain effects are not as good, like with Storm and Catch of the Day, that's when those schools start to take off. It's like Storm didn't have any inherent changes happen to it that made it better. What happened with Storm, and the reason why it came up, was because the counters got worse. Banshee got nerfed earlier this year, and that did need to happen because it was, setting up a Curse Gambit in one turn, and that was a whole problem. But ultimately what it turned into was it started turning blades into infections, and that's not as good as turning blades into weaknesses, which people have expressed an interest in seeing return. Like 25 weaknesses for 2 blades is like, I think that would be fine, and it would be an actual punishment to use the Catch of the Day rather than just having to enfeeble and eat a hit anyway. So it's like we're just not in the best of spots when it comes to counters for some schools, and it's like for some schools the counters are much better than others, and that sort of defines where you are on the tier list, on the ranking, how well you perform. And it's like in the event of like the Fire and Ice schools, for example, it's like Fire has like 2 very safe matchups for the other school, being Storm and Life, and those are just unwinnable. And then Ice has Fire and Myth, which are also unwinnable, but the neutral school on the wheel, as well as Balance sort of pieces apart Fire and Ice pretty well too, but the neutral school, for Fire it's Death, and for Ice it's Life. Death and Life perform extremely well against Fire and Ice respectively, and so you kind of just exist in a meta where some schools have 4 nightmare matchups and they don't really have that many good matchups. So that's where that resides. And Fire in particular, it's like Fire versus Myth actually favors the Myth, and Fire should be countering Myth. So I don't know. You've kind of just got to play cheesy as a Fire. It's like Barry ran a Fire, and abusing Surge like I was talking about earlier. That's kind of the only way the Fire stays afloat right now. And just that general, I guess, idea is why I think that PvP has gotten worse. There's just less skill to go around. It's more dependent on the counter matchup, and it's like most matches are decided the moment that both players load into the arena. It's like if you see somebody is like a school that just performs well against yours, there's oftentimes no skill gap that is big enough to have the disadvantaged school win. It's like an Ice versus a Balance, for example. The second that both of you load in, the outcome of the match has already been determined. It's like you're just sort of sitting there for pity at that point. And it's like that is something that I think needs to go. I mean, I could sit here and talk forever about how horrible counter matchups are just as a concept, but I think that'll be saved for another video, and this one's already getting a little long, so I think that is where I'm going to wrap things up. Just as a general thing, there's less skill involved and more RNG, and it's more dependent on counters now than it ever has been. And that is exactly what the devs want, and that problem is only going to get worse because the developers of this game want us, the players, to play how they want us to play rather than how we want to play. And that, I think, is... It's not a good look, and this whole fusion thing that has come up in this last week that I do want to talk about at some point, it's looking interesting, but ultimately I think it's just going to be more deck RNG. So It's like even when we can dip into a school that counters us and have it actually work, it still is not going to be too great. Just because, you know, deck RNG and all that. So we'll just have to see how it goes. I'm not really optimistic for this update, but we're going to have to just see, I guess. So that is going to wrap up this video. Thank y'all for watching. I've been iScold. Be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a 50 comments for the algorithm. My Discord is down in the description if you want to chat with me some more, and I am going to go get some canes.